Before we begin, listener, remember to gently tap like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Tonight, I'll take you through the quiet halls where the walls still breathe, where every sound means something, even when no one's there to make it. 5 stories, each one a whisper left behind by those who never truly left. So, turn down the lights, lie still, and listen carefully, because some sounds don't stop when you wake up. Story 1, The Sleeper Under the Soil. I had been assigned to the remote atmospheric outpost for just 3 nights when I first heard it, that slow, damp breath rising from beneath the floorboards. The station stood alone deep inside the wet forest, surrounded by fog that clung to the branches like old memories refusing to let go. Every night, the soil outside pulsed softly, as though something beneath the ground shifted in its sleep. Inside, the ambience was steady, the muted hum of the generator, the occasional crackle of the radio picking up distant static. But then, there were the knocks. 3 of them. Always 3. Talk, talk, talk. They came from directly under the metal plates of my room, delicate at first, as if testing the thickness of the floor. And each time, I felt the vibration travel up the frame of my bed, brushing the edge of my spine like a whispered warning. On that 3rd night, when the breath rose slower, heavier, it sounded as though it knew I was awake. The following morning should have felt ordinary, but the forest outside the outpost had grown unnervingly still. No insects chirping, no distant rustle of leaves, just a wet, muffled silence draped across the clearing. It was the kind of quiet that didn't soothe. It subdued, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I walked the length of the narrow station corridor, the metal flooring chilled under my feet. Every step echoed a little too sharply. When I reached the monitoring room, I paused. The air felt displaced, as though someone had just been standing there seconds before. My instruments were where I left them. Yet the humidity gauge flickered between numbers in a slow, uneasy rhythm. Then the sound returned. Not the knocks. Something else. A low shifting, like the dragging of wet fabric across soil, rising from beneath the foundation. I knelt down, pressing my ear to the cold metal. There was movement down there, small but intentional, weaving through the earth with a pace that reminded me distinctly of breathing. But this time, that breath had grown curious. I checked the structural logs, flipping through the thin pages. No seismic activity reported. No burrowing animals native to this terrain. Nothing that should be capable of creating a sound pattern that's steady, that deliberate. Yet, when I stood up, the metal plate under my left foot dipped. Just a fraction, barely the thickness of a fingernail, but enough to send a pulse of warning straight through my chest. As the daylight waned, the fog outside thickened, curling against the windows. I tried to focus on data entries, but every few minutes the same sensation returned, the feeling of something shifting toward the outpost from beneath, inch by inch, as if mapping exactly where I moved. That night, as I turned off the main lights, the 3 knocks came again. Talk, talk, talk. But this time, they weren't beneath the floor. They were beneath my bed. The knocks did not stop after the first 3. They paused, then resumed, softer this time, like fingertips testing the wood beneath the bed frame. Talk, talk, talk. A 4th knock almost came. I could feel it gathering like a breath, yet it never arrived. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound itself. swelling until it pressed against my ears. I remained still in the darkness, refusing to shift even a millimeter. The air inside the outpost thickened, saturated with the cold scent of wet soil. Every inhale tasted like earth that had been recently turned. I could hear the generator humming steadily outside the corridor, but even that familiar noise seemed to retreat into the distance, swallowed by the deeper vibration rising through the floor. It started as a tremor, a thin, quivering line of movement under the metal plating. Then it grew, slow, deliberate drags across the foundation, circling beneath my room. I felt each pass beneath the bed, the vibrations collecting in the wooden frame, looming upward through the mattress like someone brushing a hand along the underside. Searching for the exact point where my weight pressed down, I whispered into the empty room, barely a breath, "I know you're there." And something below answered with stillness, a waiting stillness. Minutes stretched, suspended, until the quiet broke with a new sound, a deep, resonant exhale. Not wind, not settling pipes, a breath, wet, strained, pulled from earth-packed lungs. It released directly beneath where my chest lay, so close I felt its warmth through the mattress. The walls joined in then. A faint metallic rattle shimmered across the screws, holding the panels together, as though the entire outpost was reacting to the movement beneath it. Shadows quivered on the ceiling, rippling in waves like the room itself was breathing. I rose slowly, bracing myself against the bed frame. The floor felt warmer than it should, almost feverish. I reached for my torch, flicking it on. The beam cut through the dimness with a narrow, trembling stripe of white. When I angled it downward, the light seemed to vibrate. The trembling intensified. Something scraped directly beneath my feet. Not claws, not stones. Something softer, like skin sliding across packed soil, drawing closer until the entire floor lifted a fraction, as though a swell of earth was rising beneath it. I stumbled backward, and the moment my weight left the floor, the movement ceased. The silence collapsed inward once more, oppressive and hungry. But then came the sound that drove a cold line of fear straight down my spine. A single, slow tap on the far side of the room, then another, then another. But these taps were not from beneath the floor. They traced the wall, moving upward toward the window. Tolk, tolk, tolk. The fog outside pressed against the glass, pulsing in time with the knocks, as though something on the other side was breathing in rhythm with me. The glass fogged further from the inside, as if another set of lungs exhaled inches from mine. And then the soil beneath the outpost shifted all at once, a heavy, rolling surge, like a sleeper turning over in its bed. The entire station creaked under the weight of something impossibly large. The vibrations traveled through the walls, up the metal frame, and into the very air I was trying so quietly to breathe. The knock stopped, but the soil continued to move, slowly, purposefully, upward. I realized, in the thickening silence, that whatever moved beneath the outpost was no longer satisfied with brushing against the foundation. The upward pressure grew more deliberate, more focused, as if it had finally mapped my position with quiet, patient precision. The metal plate at the center of my room rose a fraction of an inch. A breath, a pulse, a nudge from below, steady and confident, as though it expected me to respond. I gripped the torch tighter and stepped toward the slight bulge in the floor. With each movement, the vibrations shifted toward me, trailing my footsteps with eerie intelligence. When I stopped, they stopped. When I inhaled sharply, the floor trembled back in a slow, mirroring rhythm, as if imitating the movement of my lungs. A cold realization settled over me. It wasn't merely aware of me. It was synchronizing with me. I crouched slowly, lowering the torch until the beam touched the metal plate. The light quivered on the surface, trembling as though pushed from beneath by invisible hands. Then came the sound, a soft, wet crack, like soil splitting open just below the floor. I pressed my palm against the metal. A terrible warmth met my skin. Not the warmth of machinery, the warmth of flesh, breathing, shifting inches away. I forced myself to lift the panel. The moment the screws loosened, the vibrations surged upward. The metal plate jerked, almost torn from my grip, as though something below had been waiting for the barrier to weaken. I pulled it free and staggered back. A cavity yawned beneath the floor. Not a maintenance tunnel. No such thing existed in this isolated station. This space was carved through Earth itself, its walls glistening with moisture, as though freshly formed. And in the center of the hollow, the soil pulsed. It rose and fell, a rhythmic lift of dark, wet earth, like a body breathing under a thin blanket of dirt. I leaned in, breath shallow, the torch trembling in my hand. The beam swept across the shifting ground. Something beneath the surface shifted in response, a slow ripple, traveling toward me. The ripple reached the nearest mound of soil and stopped. Then the mound lifted. A shape pressed upward from underneath, rounded, deliberate, almost like the curve of a forehead pushing against the surface. The soil thinned until it seemed ready to rupture. But before it broke, a slender crack opened along the tunnel wall. A whisper escaped. Not a voice, a breath. A breath shaped like words, shaped like my breath. I reeled backward, suddenly aware the floor behind me had begun to vibrate again. Not gently this time. The movement rolled in waves, pushing up against the other panels, traveling toward me like the slow rise of a creature shifting its massive body closer. The tunnel widened, soil falling inward with soft pattering sounds. A second mound rose beside the first, then a third, each one subtly human in shape, too human, as if bodies were lying just beneath the thin surface, waiting to be unearthed. My torch flickered, sputtering. The outpost lights above dimmed in unison. The creature, or creatures, beneath the soil exhaled together. A heavy, synchronized breath that fogged the edges of the cavity, warming the earth until droplets formed and trickled downward in thin streams. I found myself whispering, without meaning to, "What are you, Rel?" And the soil answered, not in words, in movement. The central mound swelled upward violently, a sudden, hungry lurch, striking the edge of the opening and sending clumps of earth scattering across my feet. I stumbled back, hitting the wall behind me. The entire station groaned under the pressure rising from below. Then the thing pressed again, harder, a shape pushing upward, defined by the thin veil of soil, straining against it like a face trying to breach the surface. The knocks returned suddenly. 3 perfect taps. Talk, talk, talk. But they didn't come from the tunnel, or from the floor. They came from directly beneath my bed, behind me. Slowly, the bed began to slide across the room on its own. Metal scraping against metal, pushed from below. Something beneath it was rising, something that had been waiting for me to open the floor, something that now knew exactly where the weakest point in the room was. The bed halted halfway across the room, the metal frame trembling as though something beneath it had paused to listen. I stood frozen against the wall, torchlight shivering across the floor. For several long moments, nothing moved. No knocks, no shifting soil, just a suffocating quiet thick enough to feel against my skin. Slowly, the floor's vibrations faded. Then the warmth beneath the metal plates cooled. Then even the faint, rhythmic breathing from the cavity disappeared altogether. It was as though the presence retreated. I waited, muscles locked, heartbeat pounding in my ears. When I finally pushed myself away from the wall, my legs felt weak, thin as paper. I forced a breath through my teeth, the air sharp and cold now that the underlying heat had vanished. Maybe, impossibly, whatever lurked beneath the floor had sunk back into the earth. The thought seeped into me, tentative but luminous. Maybe it's gone. My hands shook as I reached for the bed frame. The metal felt cold again, properly cold, like lifeless steel. I pushed the bed back into its place, the frame screeching faintly against the floor. The sound echoed in the small room, but nothing stirred beneath it. No answering knock, no pulse. I turned back toward the open cavity in the floor. It looked different now, smaller. The breathing mounds of soil had settled, collapsed in on themselves. Where the shapes had pressed upward moments ago, only uneven patches of dark, damp earth remained. The ripples had smoothed out. The darkness inside the hollow looked ordinary. I crouched, holding the torch closer. A peculiar stillness filled the tunnel, like a breath held too long. But the light revealed nothing, no movement, no shifting shadows, no lingering sign of the mounds that had risen toward me only minutes before. For the first time since I'd arrived at the outpost, I allowed my shoulders to loosen. Perhaps the disturbance had passed. Perhaps opening the floor had disrupted whatever strange rhythm existed beneath it. Perhaps the creature, if it was a creature, had retreated deeper into the soil, returning to whatever dark strata it came from. Still gripping the torch, I backed away from the opening and reached for the metal plate. I hesitated. The screws were scattered on the floor, some dusted with earth, some wet with condensation. One clung to my finger longer than it should have, as if the cold metal had turned strangely tacky. I pushed the plate back into position, fitting it over the cavity. The moment the metal settled into place, the outpost felt whole again, enclosed, safe, sealed. I bolted the screws in tight, listening closely for any response. None came. The silence felt cleaner now, not heavy, not watchful. I let out a long, unsteady breath and stepped into the corridor. The atmosphere there felt normal again, the low hum of the generator, the faint static at the edge of the radio, even the subtle draft whispering along the walls. My lungs loosened as I drank it in. I made tea with water heated on the small electric hob. The mundane act calmed me. The steam rising from the cup carried the faint scent of herbs, masking the smell of damp earth that had clung to my senses for days. Sitting at the narrow metal table, I closed my eyes for a moment. The warmth seeped into my palms. My breathing slowed. The tension in my shoulders softened. I allowed myself to believe I wasn't in danger anymore. When I opened my notebook to record the incident, the knocks, the breathing soil, the shapes in the cavity, my hands were steady enough to write without trembling. I even managed to laugh breathlessly at how absurd the account sounded written on paper. I looked around the room again. Everything was exactly where it should be. The bed, the instruments, the sealed floor, the gentle night humming around the outpost like a calm tide. Safe, ordinary. But then my eyes drifted to the humidity gauge. It flickered. Once, twice, the numbers rising steadily, too steadily. Humidity wasn't supposed to climb in the dead of night, not when the fog outside had thinned, but the needle crept upward all the same, inching higher in a measured, unnatural rhythm, almost like a breath inside the room. I leaned closer, frowning, and that's when I noticed the small mound of soil forming beneath the bed, rising slowly, silently, pushing the metal frame upward by the tiniest fraction, as though something had never truly retreated, as though it had only moved to a place where the floor wasn't sealed, where the soil was shallow, where it could rise again, undisturbed. The mound beneath the bed rose so slowly at first that I almost believed my eyes were playing tricks in the dim light. But then the metal legs of the frame lifted, not much, barely enough for a sheet of paper to slide under, yet enough to confirm a horrifying truth. It wasn't rising from the cavity I had opened. It wasn't returning to its old position beneath the center of the room. It had been moving beneath me the whole time, crawling through the soft underlayer of soil like a great, blind thing tracing vibrations in the air. And now it had found the thinnest point in the room's floor. I stepped back, the mug of tea trembling in my hand before I set it down. The mound swelled again, pushing the bed upward another breath's worth. The frame creaked softly, the sound sharp in the stillness. I whispered, barely audible, "No farce. Not again. Not here." The mound paused, as though listening. Then the knocks returned, 3 of them, directly beneath the underside of the bed frame. Perfect. Precise. Talk, talk, talk. But the sound was different this time. Not exploratory. Not a warning. A summons. The floor beneath the bed buckled, a soft crack rolling outward in a ring. The metal plate flexed upward, straining like the lid of a container about to burst under pressure. The steam from my cup curled in the air, drifting toward the rising mound as though pulled by a gentle breath. I knew I had seconds, perhaps less. I lunged for my pack, shoving inside whatever I could reach: the torch, the radio, the notebook. My hands fumbled over the last screwdriver, the metal still slick with soil, and for a moment I hesitated, glancing at the sealed plate in the floor. Had I trapped something below, or had I shut myself in with it? The mound surged higher. The bed jolted, scraping against the wall as its legs lifted unevenly. Beneath it, the metal plate fractured, a thin line splitting outward like a vein bursting open. I ran for the door. Behind me, something rose through the crack, a shape pushing against the flooring, straining upward. The sound of shifting earth rushed into the room, louder than ever, like a massive creature drawing itself toward the surface after a long, suffocating sleep. I threw the lock and flung the door open just as the bed toppled forward with a thunderous crash. The corridor was darker than it should have been. The lights along the ceiling flickered, dimming in long, trembling pulses that matched the rhythm of the soil shifting beneath the entire outpost. Each pulse rolled through the metal structure, vibrating the walls, the handrails, even the stale air between them. The entire building was breathing. I sprinted down the narrow passage, boots clanging on the metal floor. Behind me, I could hear the creature following, not with footsteps, but with rising. The soil pushed upward in waves, rolling beneath the station like a moving hill. Panels buckled, screws popped. A deep, resonant groan echoed from the foundation. It was no longer exploring the outpost. It was entering it. A loud crack erupted behind me. I risked a glance back. The corridor floor had split open in a jagged seam, and soil poured upward through the gap, heaving like a chest, trying to exhale after being trapped too long below. I dashed to the generator room, the only part of the outpost built on reinforced concrete. The vibrations softened under my feet as I entered. The soil unable to reach as easily here, but the door wouldn't close. Something pressed against it from the other side, not forcefully, but rhythmically, like steady breathing. The metal door bent inward by a fraction, bowing with each subtle pulse. The lights flickered again, then died. For a single moment, nothing stirred. Then the knocks came, not from the door, not from the floor, from inside the room. 3 slow taps behind me. Tock, tock, tock. My breath hitched. I spun, sweeping the torch across the darkness. The beam quivered as it passed over the walls. The machinery, the coils of cable on the floor. Nothing moved. Then I saw it, a small mound in the corner, rising through a hairline crack in the concrete I hadn't noticed before. Earth pushed upward, slow but unstoppable, widening the fissure. The mound grew until it pressed against the metal cabinet beside it, tilting it with a groaning scrape. I had nowhere left to retreat. My pulse thundered in my ears, matching the slow heaving of the mound. I stepped backward until my hand found the emergency release lever beside the outer door, the one that led to the forest clearing. I hesitated. If I opened it, the creature might sense the vibrations of my escape instantly. But staying meant being cornered in a concrete box with no way out. The mound shuddered again. The soil cracked. Something beneath it shifted with dreadful purpose. I pulled the lever. The outer door exploded open under the pressure differential, slamming into the wall. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine needles and wet bark. I ran. I leapt off the outpost steps into the fog-thick clearing, boots sinking into the soft, damp ground. Behind me, the outpost convulsed, panels rattling, the whole structure groaning under the pressure of something rising from every corner beneath it. The earth bulged outward around the foundation like a great lung expanding. I didn't look back again. I sprinted into the forest, crashing through ferns and low branches, breath tearing in my throat. The fog blurred everything into pale smears, but I kept running until the hum of the generator faded, until even the unnatural vibrations beneath the ground subsided to nothing. Only when my legs buckled beneath me did I allow myself to collapse against a fallen log. The night was quiet, truly quiet. No breathing earth, no shifting soil, no knocks. I pressed a hand against the ground. It was still, but the silence felt wrong, hollow, expectant. Then, faintly, impossibly softly, I felt it. A single vibration, deep, far below. A slow, deliberate pulse, matching my heartbeat. I stayed there on the forest floor, breath misting in the cold air, waiting for the pulse beneath the soil to fade. But it didn't fade. It strengthened. Not violently, not the terrifying surges I'd felt in the outpost, but in a slow, steady rhythm, a patient one, a rhythm that aligned itself with mine as though something far beneath the earth listened carefully, then adjusted its heartbeat to meet my own. I pulled my hand away from the ground, but the sensation didn't stop. The pulse followed up my arm, up my neck, into my jaw, a phantom throb, as though the soil still pressed against my skin even when nothing touched me. I stood, dizzy, and turned back toward the outpost. Through the fog, its outline looked wrong, too still, too sunken, as if the entire building had begun to settle into the earth. Lights flickered briefly in one of the windows. Then 3 soft knocks echoed across the clearing. Talk, talk, talk. Not from the outpost, from the forest floor beneath my boots. I stepped back instinctively, but the ground followed, the soil rising the faintest fraction with each of my movements, mimicking the pressure of my footsteps, mirroring the shift of my weight, like it was learning to follow me, not by sound, not by proximity, by heartbeat. My radio crackled suddenly in my pack. I fumbled for it, lifting it to my ear. Static hissed through the speaker, long waves of white noise bending and warping as though pushed through moving earth. Then, beneath the static, I heard it, my voice, whispering, faint, distorted, repeating the exact breaths I took, half a second before I took them, as if something beneath the soil wasn't just following my heartbeat now, but practicing my breathing too, preparing to rise again, closer, above the ground next time, maybe even standing where I stood. And just before the radio cut out entirely, I heard one final whisper, shaped like an exhale through damp lungs. I'm awake. A second pulse rose under the forest floor, then a third, slow, steady, coming closer. Story 2, the corridor that counts. I always thought the quiet part of the building would help me stay calm on night shifts. Just me, a thermos of stale coffee, and 400 meters of paper-thin walls holding decades of forgotten files. The air in the records wing had its own kind of weight, saturated with dust and the faint, dry smell of paper that had outlived the people who wrote it. The corridor outside my office ran in one long, stubborn line, lit by a chain of old ceiling lamps that hummed more than they shone. On some nights, when the wind was right, it slipped through the cracks in the windows and made the files whisper against each other on the shelves. It sounded almost like people talking far away. That night, though, the wind was dead. The lamps hummed. The building breathed shallowly around me. I was halfway through a report when I heard it. A voice, far down the corridor. Soft, careful, counting. 1. A pause. Air thickened. 2. This time, closer. 3. The lamps above me flickered once, as if they shuddered with the number. Then the counting stopped. Not at 4. Not at 5. It stopped like it was waiting for me to answer. The counting didn't return. Not right away. I leaned out of my office doorway, peering into the long spine of the corridor. The lamps stretched ahead in a wavering line, each bulb wrapped in a faint halo of dust. At the far end, where the corridor blurred into shadow, nothing moved. No footsteps, no breath, no human presence. But the air felt as though someone had just walked through it. I stepped out cautiously. My shoes clicked against the linoleum floor. 1, 2, 3, each tap too loud for the heavy silence. The second lamp above me flickered again, dimming for a heartbeat before glowing back to life. I told myself it was the wiring. This wing was old enough to have outlived several maintenance schedules. Still, I took another step. Far down the corridor, a file slipped from a shelf, dropping softly onto the floor. Not falling, not sliding, placed. I approached it slowly, pulse drumming. The file lay open, pages fanned neatly as if someone had gone through it moments before. The paper was still settling, releasing a faint crackling sound like a sigh. Then the counting returned, not from the far end, not from behind me, but from the ceiling, pressed close to the metal panels above my head. 1. A whisper sliding between the wires. 2. Lower this time, almost a murmur beneath my skin. I stepped back, and the counting stopped instantly, like it noticed, like it reacted. A chill crept across my shoulders, settling at the base of my neck. I swallowed and against my better judgment spoke aloud into the corridor. 3. The corridor inhaled, a soft shift in the air, subtle as dust lifting. Then the voice answered from the darkness. That's wrong. The lamps flickered sharply, a rapid tremor of light, and the whisper slid down from the ceiling to ground level, so close to my feet that I felt the breath of it along my ankles. I stumbled back toward my office door, but the handle trembled faintly in my hand, vibrating with a rhythm I recognized too quickly. Counting. Someone counting on the other side of the metal. 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. The numbers staggered, breaking apart, like something learning them for the first time. Something practicing. Something coming closer each time it made a mistake. I let go of the handle. The counting stopped, and the silence that followed felt thick enough to smother. The silence didn't hold for long. It fractured softly at first, like the crack of settling wood, then deepened into something far more deliberate. A breath. Not mine. Not human. It slipped across the floor behind me. A thin exhale, dragging dust along the linoleum. I turned slowly, forcing my torch to stay steady as I swept the beam down the empty length of corridor. Nothing moved. No door ajar. No shadow shifting. But the breath had been real, and it hadn't come from behind a wall or through a vent. It had been right there, on the floor, as though someone had lain flat and exhaled directly along my shoes. Then the counting resumed. Not whispered this time, layered. Multiple voices, overlapping in uneven intervals, weaving together like threads pulled through fabric. 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 3. Some high, some low, some impossibly close. The lights overhead flickered in a pattern that made my stomach twist. 3 pulses of brightness, 1 long, 2 short, then a stuttering fade that matched the stumbling rhythm of the numbers. The corridor wasn't just filled with sound now. It was reacting to it. I stepped backward on instinct. The counting surged forward, like a tide. Each number brought with it a faint tap light, rapid, rhythmic echoing just behind my heels. Not footsteps, not quite. More like fingers, drumming against the floor in perfect time with the whispered numbers. I spun, aiming the torch down at my feet. Nothing. No hands. No shapes. But the tapping didn't stop. It crawled under the linoleum, tracing the outline of my shoes, skittering like something eager to find the exact pace of my heartbeat. I lifted one foot. The tapping followed the movement. Upward, onto the wall beside me. Tiny thuds, rapid as insect wings, climbing, ascending. The voices changed too. They no longer whispered numbers, they spat them, rushed them, flung them into the corridor with breathless urgency. 4445555. The voices stacked into discord, overstepping one another, racing faster with each count as if trying to force me to respond. I clamped my jaw shut, refusing to react, refusing to give the corridor what it seemed to want. But the corridor reacted anyway. The lamps flickered violently, and for a moment the entire spine of the hallway plunged into darkness absolute, swallowing, suffocating darkness. When the light snapped back to life, the far end of the corridor had changed. It was longer. The floor between two lamps had stretched, pulled taut like elastic. The distance that had once been maybe 7 or 8 meters now looked nearly triple that. The shelves along the walls bent backward with the distortion. Their shadows lengthened unnaturally like ink poured across cold marble. I blinked hard, but the stretch remained, and in that elongated patch of corridor, I saw movement, a shape, not a person, not quite, a distortion in the air, like heat rising off asphalt, shimmering faintly as it drifted just above the floor. The counting voices dimmed the moment I focused on it, like they were drawing breath. The shape tilted, turned, listened, then it began counting again. 1. The voice came not from where the shape was, but directly beside my left ear. I jerked away, stumbling sideways, and the number followed like a knife edge sliding under my skin. 2. This time from the floor. 3. From behind my ribs, vibrating through the bones. I pressed my back to the nearest metal cabinet, breath ragged. The cabinet vibrated lightly rhythmically, counting with me, counting around me. The shape at the far end of the corridor flickered, stretched, and shifted a few inches closer. All the voices stopped, together, crisp as a held breath. Then, in perfect unison, they whispered, "Your turn." The corridor lights died again, and something began moving toward me, with the sound of numbers closing in like footsteps. The darkness didn't fall like a curtain. It pressed in, thick, waited, alive. I held my breath without meaning to, the instinctive tightening of my chest almost painful. The corridor's silence wrapped around me, dense as wool, muting even the faint hum of electricity that usually seeped through the walls. It felt as though the building itself had stopped breathing. Then, from somewhere inside that darkness, the counting resumed, but not aloud. This time, it vibrated through the floor, a dull, rhythmic tremor, a pulse, a heartbeat made of numbers. 1. The floor throbbed gently beneath my boots. 2. A stronger pulse, spreading outward like ripples in water. 3. The metal cabinet behind me shivered. The vibrations moved with purpose, as though traveling down the corridor toward the far end, toward the shimmering distortion I had glimpsed before the lights died. I steadied my torch and flicked it back on. The beam stuttered, shaking badly as if the batteries themselves were afraid. The corridor was there again, but wrong, more warped than before. The stretch in the hallway had grown, extending the distance to the far end by at least another 20 meters. The shelves bent, bowing outward like they were being pulled towards some unseen gravitational center. A handful of files slipped free and drifted to the floor as though carried by a slow underwater current. And the distortion was closer, much closer. It hovered only a few meters away now, a shimmer in the air, a faint suggestion of a figure made entirely of trembling light. It had no outline, no limbs, no face, only a trembling vertical shape, like an unfinished reflection on a fractured mirror. I forced myself to speak. "Who's there?" The distortion rippled sharply, bending inwards as if folding around the sound of my voice. And then it answered, not with a word, with the number 4. But the voice didn't come from the distortion. It came from the ceiling above me. So close, it felt like it brushed my hair. I flinched away, heart pounding. The distortion tilted toward me. Listening, it spoke again. 4. The same number, the same tone, repeating it, testing it. I felt something cold and thin slide down the length of my spine. The shape wasn't counting for itself. It was imitating me, trying to match my voice, syllable by syllable, learning the weight of each number. I took a cautious step back. The distortion surged forward an equal step, but not through motion. It simply appeared closer, as though space collapsed beneath it. The corridor trembled again. 5. The number rolled beneath my shoes like a wave of air. 6. Dust lifted from the floor in a thin veil. 7. The distortion split for a moment, two shapes forming, then merging again. Every new number pulled it toward me. My throat tightened. Stop. The distortion snapped upright. The counting halted. The air shuddered around us, tense enough to snap. Then the shape whispered, "You stop, I come." The lights at the far end of the corridor burst into a frantic flicker, flashing in staccato bursts. Each burst showed the distortion a fraction closer. My breath shortened. Quick, shallow. I bolted. I sprinted down the corridor, shoulder-brushing shelves and loose papers exploding into whirlwinds around me. The voices swelled behind me, rising in pitch and speed, counting as if racing to catch me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. With every number, a slam echoed down the hall. A door, another door, then another. Metal doors flinging open on both sides of the corridor in perfect rhythm with the count. Not pushing outward, pulling inward, as though something behind them inhaled. The distortion surged forward in a single glide, covering 10 meters like it was nothing. The lights bent, elongating in streaks as if the corridor was tearing open around it. I stumbled, catching myself on a door frame, but the door slammed shut an inch from my hand. The voices screamed the next number. 8. The distortion appeared directly behind me, breathless and silent. I could feel it, the air around it bending, pulling, waiting for the next number. It whispered in my ear, perfectly matching my own voice. Say 9. I didn't. I ran. I didn't know how long I ran, only that the corridor finally stopped shifting around me. The walls steadied, the lights brightened, and the distorted stretch in the hallway seemed to snap back into its original shape all at once, like an elastic band released from tension. The sudden normality hit me so abruptly that I stumbled, knees threatening to give way beneath me. Behind me, nothing. No footsteps. No counting. No distortion. Just silence. Thick and strangely familiar. I braced myself against the nearest cabinet, sucking in rapid breaths. The corridor looked the way it always had, long, dim, dusty, lit by humming lamps. The air heavy with the smell of aging paper. If not for the sweat soaking through my shirt and the tremor in my fingers, I could have convinced myself the last few minutes, or hours, had been a stress-fueled hallucination brought on by solitude and too much bad coffee. I forced myself to turn back, The corridor was empty. Completely. No distortion. No stretched floors. No opening doors timed with numbers. Just the faint flicker of a dying bulb and the rustle of a file settling on a shelf. A fragile laugh escaped me. Too loud. Too sharp. It echoed, bouncing harmlessly down the hall. No answering whisper. No phantom breath. For the first time that night, the building felt like a building again, still unsettling, still old, but grounded in the physical world. I walked slowly back to my office, deliberate, cautious, testing the floor with each step. Nothing followed. The rhythm of my steps was mine alone. The counting in my head quieted to a dull memory. At my door, I hesitated. The handle was cool under my palm, not vibrating, not tremoring with hidden numbers. I pushed the door open. The fluorescent bulb buzzed above my desk, throwing pale light across my papers. Everything was exactly where I had left it. My chair slightly askew, my mug half full, my report open with a pen resting across the page. A gulp of relief nearly choked me. I stepped in and shut the door behind me. The latch clicked softly, a sound so normal it felt like a whispered apology from the building. I sat. My legs finally stopped shaking. The quiet surrounded me in a way I could finally breathe through. I picked up the pen. All I wanted now was to document everything, for my own sanity, if nothing else. To pin the experience down on paper, strip it of its power, bind it in ink and logic. If I could describe it, maybe I could diminish it, or understand it, or at least believe I hadn't invented it. The report lay open to the page where I'd stopped earlier. My handwriting waited for me in steady lines. Unusual auditory disturbance noted at 2:13. Possible draft or mechanical resonance. I snorted. Understatement of the century. I brought the pen to the page and froze. Another line had been added beneath my last note. Something I had not written. The handwriting was mine, perfectly mine, down to the slight curl of the R's and the way I tended to lean my letters when I was tired. It read, "You're safe now." For a moment, I simply stared. A hollow chill opened beneath my ribs. Another line bled into view, as if written by invisible ink, darkening in slow motion. But only because you ran. The lights flickered, very gently, barely there. Enough that I gasped and jerked my head up, scanning the room. Still nothing. Still safe. Still silent. I looked back at the page, heart pounding. Another line appeared. The pen wasn't touching the paper. My hands weren't moving. If you had said 9, the sentence trailed off, unfinished, like someone had hesitated before revealing the rest. I shoved my chair back, breath catching in my throat. "No," I whispered. "No, you're gone. You're..." Before the word safe could leave my mouth, the bulb above me flickered again, this time longer, slower, like an eye fluttering open. The lamp hummed. Once, twice, then steadied. I told myself not to look at the corridor. I looked anyway. The corridor was still empty, but the nearest lamp to my office, one I knew had been steady all night, dimmed suddenly, then brightened again in 3 slow pulses. 1, 2, 3. My stomach dropped. Behind me, the pen rolled across the desk. Not fast, not pushed, just rolling, in a straight line, toward the doorway, as though something had tapped it. I stood up and felt the faintest exhale brush the back of my neck. Slow, careful, counting the length of my breath. The breath on the back of my neck was so gentle, so precise, that for a split second my mind tried to rationalize it. A draft, a trick of temperature, anything except the obvious. But something in that exhale matched me too perfectly. The length of it, the pause at the end, the slight tremor of fear woven into it. It was counting me, measuring me, learning me. I spun around, torch raised, but the room was empty. The corner shadows remained shadows. The paper stacks stayed still. My breath fogged faintly in the cold air, but nothing else disturbed the space. Nothing visible. Then the counting resumed. Not whispered, not spoken, vibrated through the walls. 1. A tremor rolled behind the filing cabinets, rattling the metal drawers. 2. The light above me dimmed, buzzing like a failing heart. 3. A low pulse traveled under the floor tiles, sliding along the grout lines like a ripple of pressure. I staggered back, grip tightening on the torch. No, stop, stop. The building did not listen. 4. This time, the number came from inside the walls. A deep resonance, as if the whole structure had swallowed the sound and was releasing it now, amplified and distorted. The corridor outside my office flickered into darkness. I bolted toward the door. I don't remember deciding to run. My body moved before my thoughts could catch up, but as I crossed the threshold into the hallway, the doors lining both sides slammed open all at once, exploding outward with enough force to send echoes knifing down the corridor. Every door, every archive room, every storage closet, all yawning wide like mouths gasping for breath. A gust of stale air rushed out of them, carrying the smell of old paper and something wetter, something like damp concrete that had been sealed too long. Inside each open doorway, files trembled, not falling, trembling, as if stirred by dozens of invisible fingers drumming along their spines. And the counting sharpened. 5, 6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8. So fast the numbers smeared together, blurring into a rhythm too quick to follow. Each syllable slammed down the corridor in a shockwave, bending the light above in rapid pulses. I clamped my hands over my ears. Didn't help. The numbers vibrated through my bones. I stumbled forward, racing past the open doors, past the shelves, bowing with unseen pressure. The corridor stretched again, the floor elongating, the lamps spacing further apart, the walls drawing back as if the building were pulling itself like taffy to keep me inside. Stop. I screamed. The corridor froze. The counting stopped mid-number. For a second, an impossible second, everything went still. Then the distortion appeared, not at the far end, not close, but everywhere at once, rippling in the air, bending light, hovering in each doorway in a dozen thin vertical shapes that flickered like half-lit reflections, all of them listening, all of them poised. Then a single voice whispered behind me, "Finish it." I turned. The distortion towered over me, taller now, its outline clearer, like a figure stretched too thin, its shape trembling with each breath it took. My breath, it inhaled when I inhaled, held when I held, trembled in the same rhythm, counting with my lungs. It whispered, 9. The floor buckled. A huge crack raced down the length of the corridor, splitting tiles as though some monstrous weight had stomped through the foundation. Dust burst upward in a choking cloud. Lights shattered in rapid-fire pops. The ceiling bowed under the pressure of unseen force. The distortion drifted closer, gliding over the broken floor without touching it. Your turn, it intoned. I knew, deep in instinct, beyond logic, that if I said 10, something irreversible would happen. Something the entity needed. Something it had been guiding me toward since the first whisper of one. So I didn't say it. I ran. I sprinted past the distortion, feeling my skin crawl as the air bent around me. The corridor convulsed, twisting, narrowing, widening, trying to disorient me. Numbers shrieked through the building, bursting from vents and floor cracks and light sockets. 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. The sound chased me like claws scraping metal. The far door, the emergency exit, flashed into view. I lunged. The distortion screamed, its voice shredding into static. The corridor began collapsing inward behind me, doors slamming shut, one by one like dominoes, falling at lethal speed. I threw my weight against the emergency bar. The door blasted open. Cold night air crashed into my lungs. I stumbled into the quiet, falling onto gravel, coughing, shaking, gulping the darkness as though it were water. Behind me, the building exhaled. The emergency door slammed shut with a violent clang. The windows pulsed once. All the lights inside flared white. Then the entire wing fell silent, completely silent. I lay there, trembling, until the sound of my heartbeat steadied into something almost normal. But as I pushed myself upright, knees shaking, I heard it. From behind the door, from inside the building, a tiny whisper, soft, careful, counting, not upward, downward. 3, 2, 1. Preparing, waiting, resetting. The numbers faded into silence, leaving the night so utterly still that even my thoughts felt too loud. Gravel pressed into my palms as I pushed myself upright. The cold air outside tasted different, clean, empty, untouched by the breathless terror that clung to the inside of the building. For a moment, I believed I had escaped. The emergency exit door loomed behind me, a slab of metal that sealed the thing inside. The windows above were dark, the long corridor now invisible beyond layers of tinted glass and shadow. The structure looked dead, or asleep, or simply exhausted. I turned away, forcing my legs toward the car park. Each step felt like peeling myself from a nightmare, slow, clumsy, shaking. The farther I got from the building, the easier it became to breathe. 20 meters away, 30, 40, my heartbeat began to settle. Then I heard it. Not from behind me, not from the building, not from the corridor. From inside my pocket, a soft crackle, static fizzing like shallow breaths. My work radio. I froze. The device wasn't even on, yet it hissed, popping with distorted noise, as if something inside the building still clung to its frequency. I lifted it out with shaking fingers, the plastic warm against my palm. The static shifted, flattened, aligned. Then a whisper threaded itself through the noise. 1. I nearly dropped the radio. The voice wasn't the corridors. It wasn't the distortions. It wasn't even quite human. It was mine. The radio crackled again. 2. Same pitch, same cadence, same faint tremor I had heard in my own voice 5 minutes earlier. I backed away another step, but the voice kept speaking, each number timed perfectly with the rise and fall of my breath. 3. My lungs tightened. The radio wasn't repeating me. It wasn't echoing something I'd already said. It was leading, counting before I inhaled, before I exhaled, before my ribs could decide how to move, like it was teaching my body a new rhythm. A countdown. I clamped my hand over the speaker and felt the casing vibrate under my palm, pulsing in steady time with the numbers. 4. The breath in my chest caught, not from fear this time, but because the rhythm of the numbers slid under my heartbeat and gently nudged it, matching it, synchronizing to it, replacing it. My pulse adjusted without my permission, falling into step with the count. The radio whispered again, almost tenderly. 5. You hear me first now. A pause. Then, closer. Next time, you'll answer. The static cut clean, and the night fell silent. Story 3. Rain that remembers my name. I rented the cliffside room for the quiet, a place where the sea handled the noise for me, waves folding over rocks, wind slipping through cracks in the shutters, the occasional gull calling itself hoarse before dusk, the kind of soundscape that made a person feel suspended from the rest of the world. That first night, the rain arrived early, gentle at first, soft pinpricks against the glass. The window looked straight toward the open sea, nothing but black water and horizon. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the rhythm settle into something steady, almost comforting. Then the rain changed. Not louder, not faster, more intentional. Tap, 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 tap. A pause, long enough for me to feel the hair on my arms rise. It repeated. Same pattern, precise. My name had 3 syllables, 3 small knocks, a beat between them. Then the final tap, shaped almost like the first letter of it. The rain shouldn't have known that. And yet, when I leaned closer, placing my hand softly on the cold glass, the next drop struck exactly where my palm rested. Like it knew I was listening. The rain didn't stop after the last tap. It lingered on the glass, as if waiting for some kind of permission, a held breath, disguised as weather. I sat back on the mattress, pulse rising just slightly, listening as the pattern resurfaced. 3 taps, a pause, a softer 4th, shaped like the beginning of my name again. I whispered into the dim room, barely audible. That's not funny. As though responding, the rain hushed for half a second, then resumed, but different now, more deliberate, slower, like someone trying to recall the rhythm of a word they'd heard only once. I stood and approached the window. The glass was cold beneath my fingertips, slick with water streaming down its face in thin threads. But the tapping did not follow the chaos of falling rain. It came in beats, spaced evenly, always from the same height, always from the same angle. A shiver crept up my arms. I stepped back, outside. The sea should have been roaring. The storm was heavy enough that waves must have been crashing against the cliff base. Yet all I heard was the rainfall in the glass and the faint, rhythmic rustling of wind curling around the shutters. I cracked the window latch open by an inch. The moment the gap appeared, the tapping stopped altogether. The wind pushed lightly through, carrying the sharp scent of cold sea and wet stone. I listened closely, leaning into the opening, expecting to hear the true rain outside, scattered, chaotic, random. But what met my ears was silence. The The rain wasn't hitting the wall around the window, wasn't falling on the balcony, wasn't touching the metal gutter. It was only hitting the glass, directly, purposefully, as though the entire storm existed only on the side facing me. I closed the latch, fingers trembling, almost instantly. The tapping resumed, louder now, more confident, landing in crisp, articulate strikes. The pattern repeated with uncanny precision, a deliberate mimicry of the syllables in my name. Then something subtle changed. The wind outside shifted direction. Once, twice. Then it settled into a strange, circular motion, sweeping past the balcony railings in slow rotations, almost like it was adjusting itself, aligning with the imperfect rhythm of the rainfall. The next series of taps landed on the glass with a strange clarity, not softer, not sharper, but corrected, as though the rain was fixing its mistake, practicing until it got the tempo right. I stepped back toward the bed, unsure whether to sit or flee. When I reached the mattress edge, the rain paused again. This time, the silence felt expectant, stretched thin, as though waiting for a cue. I breathed out through my teeth, barely forming the word. Stop. The rain obeyed. Immediately. Absolutely. Without a single stray drop striking the glass. The entire room filled with the sound of the sea again, as if the storm were just an illusion peeled away the moment I denied it. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't dare approach the window again, because deep in that sudden quiet, softer than a heartbeat, I heard a single drop strike the inside wall. Not outside. Inside. Right behind me. I didn't turn around at first. That single drop behind me, too close, too precise, pinned me in place. The room was cold, but a bead of sweat slid slowly down my spine, following the same trajectory as the imagined droplet. I forced myself to look. The wall behind me was dry, completely. No crack, no stain, no leak. Yet as I stared, another sound came. Talk. A single sharp tap. Not dripping water, not settling wood. A tap, identical to the ones on the glass, but this time it came from the ceiling. I lifted my torch, sweeping the narrow beam across the painted surface. The light shuddered faintly with my unsteady hands, but nothing moved. No shifting shadows, no droplets. The ceiling remained blank and pale. Then the rain outside answered, not with a pattern, with a voice. Tap, 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 tap. Slower now, more distinct. The rhythm thickened, each drop landing like a fingertip striking glass. The storm outside seemed to lean closer, the sea withdrawing into a hush as though listening. I walked toward the window again, though every part of me screamed not to. The glass fogged slightly as I approached, but not from my breath. From outside, a warm, damp breath pressed through the thin barrier, spreading in a patch that grew wider, warmer. Rain should have stolen heat, not given it. But this was no ordinary rain. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the droplets began to fall in arranged sequences. Lines, rows, patterns that repeated with slight variations, like handwriting, like strokes forming letters, forming my name, not perfect, not yet, but recognizable. A low tremor shook the window frame, subtle enough that I thought it was just the wind, until the tapping changed again, faster, cleaner, more articulate. The sound sharpened. No longer soft water, but something with weight, like nails, or knuckles, or hardened fingertips grown from the rain itself. The storm condensed its rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap. My name again. Clearer. I stepped back instinctively, but the sound followed. The next knock fell at the exact moment my foot touched the floorboards. Another when I shifted my weight. Another when my breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't just mimicking my name now. It was mimicking my movements. Outside, the sea vanished into a wall of darkness, a pitch-black shape too still to be waves, too tall to be mist. It stood there behind the rainfall, filling the horizon, blocking out the natural world. The rain cascaded down its invisible surface, bending and curving in unnatural flows like fingers moving over glass. Then the hissing of the storm deepened into something else. A voice. Not words yet. Just the shape of speech. Wet consonants forming at the back of whatever hid behind the rain. Breath pressed against the glass so hard the pane bowed inward by a hair's width. The tapping rose into a frantic flurry, a rush of droplets hammering syllables too fast for any human tongue. T-tag. Trying. Learning. Failing. Again. And again. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The tapping. The wind. Even the deep breathing against the glass. Silence. Heavy, waiting silence. I leaned forward slow, barely moving until my ear was an inch from the window. Nothing. I exhaled. That was when it spoke. Through the glass. Through the rain. Through a mouth I could not see. Not perfect, but close enough. It said my name. The moment it spoke my name, the air in the room changed. Not colder, heavier, as though every molecule pressed inward, thickening around my ribs and slowing each breath. I felt the sound more than heard it, a wet, hushed syllable dragged across glass, shaped too carefully to be an accident. I stepped back. The window stepped forward. The entire pane bulged inward by a centimeter, subtle, but unmistakable. Glass isn't supposed to behave like soft metal, but this pane swelled as if something massive leaned against it from the outside, pushing gently, deliberately. The rain resumed, but no longer in chaotic drops. Each fall was precise, spaced, articulating the edges of the word it had spoken. My name again, broken into syllables. Tap, 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 tap. I raised my torch toward the window. At first, all I saw was rain, sheets of water racing down the pane. But the longer I stared, the more I saw the pattern, each droplet descending in the exact same curved path, as if pulled by invisible fingers tracing the glass. Then the sea vanished again. Not faded. Vanished. The darkness outside grew solid, swallowing the horizon until only a single plane of blackness remained. No waves. No reflection. No movement except for the falling rain, which now looked like strands of hair brushing down a face just outside the window. A breath fogged across the glass from the outside. Warm. Human. Close. The fog expanded into the shape of a mouth. Not detailed, just the suggestion of one. Lips that never fully formed, but whose movement aligned perfectly with the rain tapping out my name. I whispered, voice trembling, "What do you want?" Immediately, a new shape formed in the fog, crude, distorted, like a child trying to draw an expression. A smile, too wide, too tall, still forming as if bones rearranged behind the darkness. Then the tapping changed. It wasn't my name this time. It was the shape of breath, like the sound of someone inhaling sharply through teeth, mimicking the way I had spoken. My voice returned to me. Through water, I felt something warm drip onto my shoulder. I froze. Another drip, then another. Slowly, I lifted my hand and touched the fabric of my shirt. Dry. The ceiling above me creaked. The bright line of moisture crawled down the plaster, not dripping straight down, but spreading left and right, forming a branching pattern like veins. Each branch pulsed faintly in rhythm with the tapping on the window, as though the sound outside was moving through the walls inside. I backed toward the door, but the rain reacted instantly. The tapping intensified, sharp enough to sound like fingernails against glass. The pane bulged again, the entire frame groaning as pressure pushed inward. The fog on the window cleared in a single sweep, wiped away from the inside by the force of the distortion behind it. For the first time, I saw an outline, a torso, tall, impossibly tall, stretching down into the sea-black void below. Its arms were the rain, thin streams of water lifting and falling like strands pulled taut by invisible joints. Each one struck the window with purpose, forming shapes, tapping patterns. The face leaned closer, no features except the suggestion of breath across the glass. My name formed again, but this time, spoken in my exact voice. Not a mimicry, a perfect duplicate. I felt something touch the back of my neck. Fingers, water, breath. I spun around. The room was empty, but the wet trail on the wall had grown. It snaked downward toward the floor, pulsating in time with the tapping outside, as though the two were finally connected. Outside, the figure pressed harder. The glass dipped. The frame shuddered. Hairline cracks bloomed from the edges, blooming like frost. It was coming through. I stumbled backward toward the far wall. The rain stopped, all at once. Not fading, stopped. The silence that followed was wrong. Too clean, too hollow. Then the darkness outside the window leaned closer, until its forehead, whatever shape it had, touched the glass. A soft, wet whisper seeped through the cracks. I know your breath. The window flexed. The first fracture snapped like a bone. The fracture spread in a thin white thread across the glass, but it didn't shatter. It paused, like whatever pressed against the window had stopped mid-movement. Reconsidering, listening, I stood frozen at the far wall, breath shallow, hands trembling at my sides. My torch beam jittered across the window, catching the reflection of my own frightened face, distorted by the bound surface. For a moment, nothing else moved. No rain, no tapping, no breath on the glass. Then, the darkness outside stepped back. The glass eased, flattening slowly, smoothing itself as if inhaling to erase the pressure. The crack remained, but the bulge receded. Rain resumed. Not tapping, not counting just rain. Normal, chaotic, scattered. The sea returned with a whisper, a real whisper. Waves slapping the cliff base in gentle, familiar rhythms. The storm was gone. Just like that. My knees weakened. I slid down the wall till I was sitting on the floor, hugging myself as the silence slowly refilled the room. The air felt lighter again, carrying the smell of wet stone and salt instead of the suffocating, humid breath from moments before. For a long minute, all I heard was the ordinary world reasserting itself. I forced myself up and approached the window carefully, ready to flee at the slightest sound. The glass lay still. Rain slid down naturally now, dripping in messy trails with no pattern, no rhythm, no intelligence, just water. Even the warp in the sea was gone. The darkness had returned to its proper distance, waves rolling, white foam glimmering faintly when lightning far offshore pulsed behind the clouds. Maybe the storm had been a hallucination. Exhaustion, isolation, stress. The thought soothed me more than I expected. It settled into my mind like warm tea on a cold night. I latched the window shut, stepped back, and let out a long breath. The room seemed normal again. The air, the light, the quiet. I checked the ceiling. The branching stain was still there, but it no longer pulsed. It had dried into faint, harmless marks like old water damage. My fingers ran across it. Dry, smooth, inert. I almost laughed. An exhausted, shaky sound, but laughter nonetheless. I drew the curtains shut, blocking out the window entirely. The darkness felt comforting now, a barrier between me and the night. I climbed into bed, letting my weight sink into the mattress. The space felt warm, safe. My heartbeat slowed. The rain outside softened further, turning into a sleepy drizzle, a lullaby of water. My eyes were closing before I realized it. At the edge of sleep, I heard something faint, a single drip somewhere in the room, but I told myself it was nothing. Old pipes, settling walls, a trick of my tired mind. Another drip, slower, lower, closer to the floor. I opened one eye. Darkness, stillness. A third drip, dry, delicate, like something tapping wood instead of falling water. I sat up. Silence. I reached for the torch and switched it on, its beam slicing the darkness. No leak, no puddle, no damage on the ceiling or walls. But then I saw it, a faint trail of wetness on the wall near the bed, not dripping downward like normal water. It ran sideways, curving, arcing, tracing a shape, a familiar rhythm. 3 short strokes, a pause, a longer one. The same pattern the rain had tapped on the window. My name. The trail glistened faintly, as if freshly drawn, not with falling water, but with condensation forming in deliberate motion, as though the rain outside had simply moved in. My breath caught, and the moment it did, the wet line moved, shivering, twitching like a living thing, following the cadence of my inhale, then my exhale, then, matching it. I stared, frozen, as the damp trail on the wall pulsed like a heartbeat. My heartbeat. The rain outside had stopped, completely, but somewhere inside my room, something continued tapping out a rhythm only I recognized. My own name, spelled slowly across the plaster. The wet line on the wall pulsed again, gently at first, just enough for the shimmer of moisture to quiver under the beam of my torch. I held my breath, hoping the movement would stop if I froze completely. It didn't. The moment my lungs tightened, the line shifted in perfect mimicry, swelling slightly with my held breath, then easing back when I exhaled. It was breathing with me, or worse, breathing because of me. A faint tapping answered from inside the wall, not from the pipes, not from the ceiling, directly behind the plaster, following the curve of the wet line like an echo dragging its fingertips across hollow wood. Tap, 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 tap. My name, again, but quieter, more intimate, like someone whispering it against the inside of my skin. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the bed. The torch flickered as my hand shook, and with each stutter of light, the wet line thickened, spreading outward in branching veins that crept along the walls like roots searching for soil. Except they weren't following the room's structure. They were following me. Each time I moved, even by an inch, the wet veins shifted direction, crawling toward whichever part of the room I drifted closest to slow. Patient, certain, I bolted for the door. The moment my foot hit the floorboard near it, every vein collapsed, inward rushing together like streams meeting at a river's mouth. The tapping behind the plaster became frantic, accelerating to a rapid flutter. Tap, 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 tap. I grabbed the handle and yanked. The door didn't open. It was damp, soft, like swollen wood that had been soaking too long. I pulled harder. The tapping behind the wall rolled downward into the floor, under the boards, toward my feet. The ground beneath me warmed, as if a heated breath seeped up from beneath the foundation. No, 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 no. The floor pulsed. Then the rain returned. Not outside. Inside the room, a sudden burst water striking the ceiling with the deafening force of 100 fists. It poured downward in vertical sheets, ignoring gravity, ignoring architecture falling where the rain wanted to fall. The room filled with the roar of it, cold droplets smashing against my face and shoulders, even though no pipe, no crack, no storm existed above me. In the chaos, I heard it again. My name, not tapped, not whispered, shouted through the rainfall in my exact voice. I lunged at the door with all my weight. It tore free from the swollen frame with a wet ripping sound, flinging splinters across the hallway. The corridor outside was dry, utterly, impossibly dry. But the moment I stepped across the threshold, the sound of rain chased after me, slamming into the doorway like a living body hitting invisible glass. The rainfall clung to the boundary of the room, unable to cross, pressing against it with violent intensity. I didn't question it. I ran, bare feet slapping the floor, breath ragged, body dripping with water that wasn't water. The hallway lights flickered awake as I passed, humming in alarm. I could still hear the storm behind me, but muffled now, compressed into the shape of a voice that kept calling my name with increasing clarity. The stairwell door groaned as I pushed through it. The air here was cold, metallic, grounded in reality. I clung to the railing, descended the steps 2 at a time, slipping once, catching myself only by sheer panic. At the bottom floor, the lobby stood silent. The glass front doors gleamed. The world beyond was calm, no rain, no wind, no storm. But every window in the lobby, every pane of glass, was covered in condensation from the inside. Behind each window, dripping slowly down the glass, was the same pattern. Tap, 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 tap. My name. I sprinted across the lobby, slipping on tiles slick with invisible moisture. The front door resisted at first, cold metal stiff beneath my hands, but then gave way, swinging open with a hollow groan. Outside was dry, utterly dry. The sky a cool, cloudless gray. The sea gentle against the cliffs. No storm, no darkness, no rain, but the sound followed me. Soft at first, then stronger. Raindrops hitting stone where no rain fell. Hit, 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 hit. My name again. I ran across the cliff path, lungs burning. The gravel crunched beneath my feet as though trying to warn me with every step. I didn't stop until I reached a massive boulder near the cliff edge, a place I could hide behind. Catch my breath. Think. The sound of rain stopped instantly. The silence slammed down like a weight. I leaned against the cold stone, chest heaving, heartbeat hammering against my ribs. My skin steamed faintly in the cool air, water evaporating into a mist that rose around me. The world was quiet again. No tapping, no voice, no rain. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness behind my eyelids, I heard it, a drip from inside my throat. Another from inside my chest, a soft, rhythmic patter falling downward, inside me, as if my lungs were collecting water. I inhaled sharply, and before I could stop myself, before I could even understand what was happening, my mouth clicked. Once, twice, then again, imitating rain, imitating the taps, speaking the rhythm back. And on the fourth tap, my lips shaped the first syllable of my own name. Without my permission, the fourth tap slipped from my lips before I could swallow it back. A hollow, delicate sound, not quite human, not quite water. It hung in the cold air in front of me like a breath I hadn't meant to release. I clamped a hand over my mouth, heart hammering, but the drip inside my chest didn't stop. It echoed upward, filling the hollow behind my sternum with the soft percussion of falling water. Something inside me was leaking. I leaned harder into the boulder, trying to calm my breathing. But every inhale felt wetter than the last, a thin trickle sliding down the inside of my lungs, pooling, shifting. Then I heard it, behind me, not from the room, not from the window, not from the storm that no longer existed, from the shadow cast by the boulder, stretching long across the gravel. A tap, then another, then two more, perfectly timed with my racing heartbeat. Tap, 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 tap. My name. But this time, the rhythm didn't come from rain striking a surface. It came from impact, like footsteps, soft, bare, and soaking wet. I froze, unable to look. A breath, warm, damp, familiar, brushed the shell of my ear, though nothing stood beside me. Then a whisper formed, not outside my body, but vibrating through the water, gathering inside my lungs. You sound like me now. My throat tightened. The drip inside my chest quickened, rising into a patter that matched the phantom footsteps behind me. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Closer. Synchronizing. I staggered forward, desperate to escape the shadow. But the moment I left it, my own shadow stretched across the ground in front of me, long, distorted, swaying like a figure made of falling water. And when I inhaled, my shadow exhaled, A soft, perfect tap struck the gravel between my feet, exactly in time with my next breath. I backed away slowly. My shadow followed, not delayed, not mirrored, anticipating me, moving half a second before I did, as though it had already learned the rhythm of my steps and was beginning to lead. A final tap landed at my heel, my name, uttered by my own lungs. Not my mouth, followed it, and the rainless sky above me whispered in a voice shaped from my breath. Next time, you open the window. Story 4. The echo that arrived before I spoke. The deeper we walked into the cavern system, the quieter the world became. No wind, no wildlife, just the faint, rhythmic drip of water falling from stalactites onto stone. It was the kind of silence that didn't simply surround you, it absorbed you. Even my own footsteps felt hesitant, swallowed before they could echo properly. I set down my pack near a narrow alcove, switching on my handheld recorder to test acoustics. The small red light blinked once, then steadied. I cleared my throat, preparing to speak, but before a single word left my mouth, a voice drifted out of the darkness ahead. My voice, soft, low, perfectly matched. It said the exact sentence I had been about to say. Acoustic test. 1. I froze. The air shifted. A faint vibration traveled along the stone wall beside me, like the cave itself was breathing in anticipation. Then the voice came again. This time, just a whisper, just my name, spoken in my cadence, my tone, but not from my lips. I stared into the dark corridor of stone, every instinct inside me urging stillness. The air carried no breeze, yet the faint vibration from the wall continued, a subtle, trembling hum that rose and fell in time with a breath that was not mine. I swallowed hard. Hello, I whispered, but the cave answered before I finished forming the second syllable. He. My own voice echoed from somewhere ahead, crisp and sure, completing the sound just before I made it. The realization hit like cold water. It wasn't repeating me. It was predicting me. I stepped backward, boots scraping against grit. The sound traveled along the corridor, and a moment later I heard it again. My own footsteps, replayed perfectly, but a half second too early. Drip, drip. 2 droplets fell somewhere deep in the cave. Their echoes rang out in sharp, overlapping layers. The timing was wrong, misaligned, as if separate pieces of the cavern were trying to imitate one another but struggling to synchronize. I clicked my tongue experimentally. A soft tick bounced back, then a second, then a third, faster than I'd produced it, like the cave was practicing the sound. What is this? I muttered. Before I could finish the sentence, the darkness ahead whispered, "What is?" The last word never came. It waited on the tip of the echo, suspended, incomplete, as though the cave wanted me to finish it, so it could copy that too. A strange pressure built in the narrow passage, a density in the air that pushed gently against my chest. With every breath I took, I felt an answering breath shiver through the stone behind me, matching my rhythm with unnerving precision. I lifted my recorder closer to my mouth. Instantly, a faint rustle shifted deeper in the cave, like someone adjusting their own device, preparing to record me, recording myself. I tightened my grip. "No, you're not," the echo interrupted. This time not early, but layered over my voice, speaking through me. "No, you're It cut off, faltering at the last moment, as though it hadn't yet learned anger, or fear, or whatever emotion had crept into my tone. My torch flickered as if responding to the hesitation. A thin draft swept past my ankles, yet nothing in the cave should have been moving the air. We were far from the entrance. There were no open vents, no secondary exits, just solid limestone and pockets of darkness. I turned slightly, the beam catching the rough texture of the passage. The moment I moved, something else moved with me, not visually, not physically, but audibly. A scrape of stone, a quiet shift, a breath too close, like an invisible version of me was walking in parallel, half a step ahead, waiting for me to catch up to my own echo. I whispered into the darkness, half challenge, half terror. Say something I'm not thinking. Silence. Then, a laugh. My laugh. But wrong. Too smooth. Too anticipatory. It slipped along the cavern walls and settled right behind my ear. The laugh clung to the cavern walls long after it should have faded, stretched thin, pulled taut, warped into something more like a chorus than a single voice. My voice, drawn out, examined, replicated. I gripped my torch tighter, forcing myself to keep breathing evenly. But even my breaths refused to belong solely to me. Each inhale echoed a heartbeat too soon. Each exhale seemed to return before I released it. The cave wasn't repeating me. It was practicing me. I took one hesitant step forward. My boot scraped the stone. Instantly, a second scrape came from deeper in the passage. Identical pitch, identical length, but subtly out of place and time, like the cave was trying to predict my next step and misfiring by a fraction. Drip, drip. The natural sounds of the cavern twitched as if flinching at my presence. Even the droplets falling from the stalactites echoed too quickly, too loudly, overlapping in frantic imitation. The deeper I listened, the more I realized they were not falling randomly. The echoes were learning the pattern of one another. I pressed forward, hoping movement would anchor me in something real. Instead, the cavern narrowed around me, and the air thickened with sound, not loud, not painful, but layered. Whisper-soft imprints of my breaths trailed ahead of me, forming a faint rhythmic pulse. Then came footsteps. Not mine. Not behind me. Ahead. Just beyond the range of my torchlight. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The sound of boots on grit. My boots. My cadence, but happening before I stepped. As if my echo self was forging the path a second ahead, guiding me deeper into territory it understood better than I did. My pulse quickened. The cave noticed. A rustle rolled through the chamber like a wave, traveling along the stone, sliding around me, brushing past the walls. The sound was so thin, so delicate. It felt like a fingertip tracing the inside curve of my ear. Then, a whisper. Not words. A rehearsal of words. A long inhale. An uncertain shaping of vowels. A low murmur. The beginning of my speech pattern looping clumsily. It was trying to talk. I lifted my recorder, more out of habit than purpose. The moment it neared my lips, a soft knock sounded from the darkness ahead, like someone tapping a device against their teeth, testing the shape of my movement. I snapped. Stop that. But the response overlapped and overpowered me, arriving a split second earlier. Stop. My own words, spoken prematurely, perfectly, without hesitation, My throat tightened. My echo didn't just know what I was going to say. It knew how I would feel when I said it. A chill crawled along the stone beneath my boots as my echo's voice deepened, steadied, refined into a version of me I had never heard. Confident, composed, almost amused. Footsteps circled me. No, not footsteps. Their sound, projecting from nowhere, shifting like invisible reflections gliding over the floor. The shadows around me pulsed. My torchlight flickered. For a heartbeat, I saw it. A humanoid outline. Not a body, but a distortion in the air, shaped by trembling vibrations, like a figure sculpted out of sound waves. Its edges rippled in sync with my breaths, forming shoulders, arms, the faint angle of a head. Then it leaned forward, without moving, just a shift in resonance, a tightening of frequencies, and breathed. The breath wasn't warm or cold. It was tonal, a low hum, woven from the faint tremor of my own voice. It whispered, "You're slow." I backed away. The sound followed, not in my direction, ahead of me, anticipating where fear would drive me. Torch shaking, I turned down a narrower passage, hoping the tight walls would choke the noise. But the stone only amplified my echo, feeding it more surfaces to bounce from. The hum behind me split into two, then three, then a chorus, each layer a slightly improved version of my voice, tuning itself, refining itself, building the ideal version of me. A perfect echo, a rehearsed echo, an echo that wanted to go first. Then the passage widened abruptly, opening into a hollow chamber. My footsteps halted at the edge, echoing into the emptiness. Only one echo returned, not mine. It said, "Finally." The chamber swallowed my footsteps as though it had been waiting for years for me to enter. My torch beam wavered across the open space, a wide dome of stone. Smooth in some places, fractured in others, as if carved partly by nature, partly by something else. The echo that had greeted me, that version of my voice, drifted through the chamber again. No longer hesitant or experimental. This time it was confident, purposeful. Finally, it repeated, not as a reflection, but as a presence. I stepped forward, breath tight in my chest. The cavern inhaled with me. A sound, my inhale, emerged from the opposite side of the chamber. Perfectly timed, but too soon. Ahead of me. "Show yourself," I whispered, but the response arrived instantly, slipping across the stone like a blade. Show yourself, not in question, in command. Something shifted above me, a flurry of tiny echoes, like pebbles falling in reverse, rose from the floor to the ceiling. I lifted my torch, its trembling beam catching a shape along the upper curve of stone, a ripple in the air, a distortion that absorbed light rather than reflected it. At first, I thought it was just heat haze. But heat doesn't mimic your breathing. Heat doesn't lean closer. The distortion descended the wall with no movement of limbs, no gesture, only the shivering rearrangement of sound waves wrapping around themselves. It reached the floor and settled into a vaguely human silhouette, tall, thin, edges flickering with each resonance. Then it spoke again. Not my voice. Not exactly. A version of my voice that had been edited, sharpened, polished. A voice that didn't hitch on fear. A voice that didn't waver. "Why are you late?" it asked. The question hit me like a stone to the chest. I opened my mouth to answer, and I know. It cut in, spoken before I spoke, reacting before I reacted. It stepped forward without stepping, gliding across stone as though it were being pulled on a string. Every shift in its form was accompanied by a soft crack of pressure, like a throat clearing itself without a body. My throat tightened. A faint answer rose inside me, a reflex to speak, to defend myself. But the echo beat me to it. I understand, it murmured. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't even decided what I wanted to say. The sound creature cocked its head, or rather, the pattern of vibrations along its upper half bent in that direction. It was learning me faster. Stop, I whispered. Stop. It echoed, not repeating, but overriding. Its voice collided with mine, swallowing the final consonant, drawing it out into a tone that felt like it tugged the air from my lungs. Something inside my chest fluttered in response, like my own breath was being rehearsed by something just behind it. I backed away. The echo moved closer. When I lifted my torch, the creature's edges trembled violently, as if the beam were revealing more of it than it wanted. For the first time, its form sharpened, the rough outline of a face emerging in the flickering resonance. Features almost mine, almost, but not born from flesh, born from sound. A mouth-shaped ripple opened where its mouth might have been. I can walk out first, it said. The same words from the earlier recording, not copied, perfected. The chamber vibrated with the sentence. Stone humming under my boots. I swallowed hard. You can't leave, I whispered. You can't leave. It agreed, but this time the tone was gentle, almost soothing. My breath trembled. The creature inhaled for me, pulling the air before I could, forcing my lungs to follow its rhythm. I stumbled backward until my heel hit a loose stone. It toppled and skidded across the chamber floor. Instantly, two echoes answered it. One from the stone, one from the creature. Then, a third came, from right beside me. I spun. Nothing, but the sound lingered, clinging to the side of my torso like a shadow made of noise. My pulse spiked. The creature steadied. We should go, it said softly. Not a suggestion, a decision. Its outline tightened, refining into a cleaner human shape. My shape, I go first. The chamber walls thrummed with the words, and the echo, my echo, stepped toward the tunnel that led back to the surface, as if claiming the right to leave in my place. The echo's silhouette glided toward the exit tunnel, its form tightening with every shift in the stone. It didn't walk, it anticipated the space ahead, occupying each patch of darkness a beat before it physically arrived there. Watching it leave was like watching my own future peel itself away from me. Then, without warning, the chamber fell utterly silent. No footsteps, no breathing, no trembling stone, just absence. The echo was gone. I stood alone in the hollow of rock, the beam of my torch trembling as it tried to catch some trace of movement. Nothing shimmered. Nothing responded. Even the oppressive pressure in the air had thinned, easing off my chest and allowing a breath that felt fully my own for the first time in minutes. My knees softened with relief. I tested my voice. Hello. Only my voice returned. No premature answering. No overlapped cadence. No mimicry. I tried again. Are you still here? Silence. Then, after a long delay, the faintest natural echo, distorted by distance, but normal. A laugh escaped me, small and nervous, but real. I checked my recorder. The red light still blinked steadily. Maybe the interference, the predictions, the mimicry, maybe all of it had been due to acoustic anomalies. Hanging waves, complex reverberations, my imagination filling the gaps between too many hours underground. I replayed the last few seconds of audio. Only static, soft, harmless, like the cave breathing. Everything felt ordinary again. I walked to the edge of the chamber and shone the torch down the tunnel. The walls looked narrower than I remembered, a comforting narrowness. Predictable. The sort of geometry sound behaved properly in. My footsteps made sense now. Each one echoed exactly once. After I stepped, never before. Piece by piece, my fear retreated into embarrassment. I wiped sweat from my forehead and muttered, "I'm losing it." The chamber echoed back, correctly delayed. Losing it. Relief washed through me like warm water. I took a few steps toward the exit tunnel. My fingers brushed along the stone wall, grounding myself in its rough, tangible texture. For the first time since entering, I didn't feel watched by the acoustics. Halfway to the tunnel mouth, something clinked. A small metallic sound, dull and abrupt. My recorder. It had slipped from my chest harness and fallen to the ground, landing upright. Still blinking. Still recording. I bent to pick it up, and the device spoke. Not in my voice. Not in the echo's voice. In both, layered together, a soft, synchronized whisper. "Don't leave." The hairs along my arms rose instantly. I froze, crouched over the device. The whisper came again, quicker, more urgent now, like sound tripping over itself. "Don't leave yet." I swallowed hard. That couldn't have. Before I could finish, the recorder clicked off. Dead. Silent. I stood upright slowly, my pulse hammering. Just malfunction. I whispered to myself. My real echo responded from the stone correctly. No overlap. No early voice. No mimicry. Logical. Predictable. I forced a deep breath and stepped into the tunnel. The stone corridor welcomed me with familiar stillness, the smell of damp minerals, the low hum of enclosed space, the distant trickle of water somewhere deeper in the cave system. My footsteps echoed behind me, perfectly timed, but then, halfway up the incline, the floor trembled beneath my boot. A soft tremor, barely there, like the cave clearing its throat. I paused and listened. Drip, drip, drip. The water droplets fell in perfect rhythm with my heartbeat. Coincidence? I whispered. Coincidence? My echo replied from farther down the tunnel. The delay, natural and honest. I continued upward, relief beginning to loosen my chest. The incline narrowed, the ceiling dropped slightly, and the world began to sound like a cave again, not a living thing. I reached the point where daylight should have begun filtering in, the pale glow from the main passage. It did. A faint wash of silver touched the stone walls, promising safety and fresh air. I exhaled. Deep, steady, a breath holy, beautifully mine. Then, behind me, so faint I almost mistook it for settling rock, a voice whispered, "I'll walk out first." My voice, but not from the chamber. Not from the tunnel, not from the cave at all. From exactly where my next step was supposed to land. I froze mid-step. My boot hovered over the stone, suspended above the exact place where the voice, my voice, had whispered it would walk out first. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The faint daylight ahead washed over the rough incline, pale and steady. But something colder held me still, a presence shaped entirely by sound, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I drew my foot back slowly. Instantly, the tunnel behind me exhaled. Not wind, not air displacement. A sound, a long, low hum vibrating through the stone like a throat clearing itself, readying for speech. My throat tightened in reflex. The sound tightened with it. I took one step backward, deeper into the tunnel. A second, heavier footstep answered, ahead of me, toward the exit. Someone, something, was imitating my movement, but removing the delay. My echo wasn't waiting anymore. It was leading. No, I whispered. No, you stay where... My echo's voice cut through the dim light, finishing the sentence 2 beats before I did. You stay where... Its tone was perfectly calm. Too calm. I angled my torch down the incline, expecting empty rock, but the beam stuttered violently, as if passing through a field of static. The air directly ahead rippled, not visibly, but audibly. A soft, choking distortion shivered through the space as though a body made of tension alone waited there. Vibrating in anticipation, the sound warped again, stretching into a low imitation of breath. My breath? Don't, it murmured. Then the sound of my own boots slamming down on the next step thundered through the tunnel, but I hadn't moved. The stone cracked under the phantom weight. Dust sifted into the beam of my torch. Something invisible had just walked past me, out of the tunnel, toward the light. No, I lunged forward instinctively, reaching toward the faint daylight beyond. The moment my weight shifted, the walls shrieked, not mechanically, but vocally. Every surface in the tunnel vibrated with an urgent, discordant blast of sound, my own voice shouting from 10 different moments of fear. Panic, confusion, all overlapped. Each echo clawed at my mind, trying to fragment my sense of time into pieces it could use. I staggered to the side, slamming into cold stone. The noise didn't fade.
Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together.
I stumbled upward, pushing myself toward the exit. The air thinned as I neared the light, but so did the sound. The tunnel no longer amplified the echo's voice. The oppressive resonance faltered, weakening in the widening space. The light grew brighter, brighter still. Just a few more steps. Then the echo's voice sounded from behind me, far down the tunnel. You're too slow. I turned. A shape, faint as breath on glass, pulsed deep in the darkness. My outline, my height, my movement. A shimmering vertical smear of sound waves holding my posture like a puppet made of resonance. It raised an arm. My arm. Half a second before I did, I jerked mine back, breaking the synchrony. The creature shuddered sharply, its form splintering into crackling distortions. I realized then, it needed my rhythm to remain whole, so I broke it. I inhaled, stopped midway, exhaled too quickly, stepped off beat, stumbling sideways, forced my heartbeat into chaos with shallow, arrhythmic gasps. The echo spasmed violently. The The tunnel filled with jagged sounds, fractured breaths, broken footsteps, shards of half-spoken words as the creature lost its ability to predict. It lunged, silently, but too late. I surged toward the exit, crashing into the daylight with a cry that wasn't echoed for the first time since entering the cave. Fresh air slammed into my lungs. The sky spread open above me. The world felt real again. Behind me, in the tunnel, the echo unleashed a scream made of my own voice, stretched, warped, cracking apart as if ripped in two. Then silence. Utter silence. I staggered into the open field, falling to my hands and knees. My chest heaved, breath returning in irregular bursts that belonged only to me. The cave mouth behind me remained a dark, patient wound in the rock. For a few long minutes, nothing happened. Then, a single footstep echoed from deep inside. Just one. Sharp, deliberate, not early, not late, perfectly timed. To the beat of my heart, the single footstep inside the cave lingered in the air like a held breath, neither fading nor multiplying. Just one sound, one echo, perfectly timed with the next thump of my pulse. I held still, crouched against the sunlit boulders outside the entrance. The breeze brushed gently across my face, carrying scents of dust and pine. Normal scents. Safe scents. I told myself the cave couldn't follow me out here. Echoes belonged to stone, not open sky. But my heartbeat disagreed. Thump. A matching step answered from inside. Thump. Another, always in time. It was walking, not toward me, not exactly. It was matching me, as though refusing to surrender the rhythm it had learned. I pressed a hand to my chest, willing my heart to slow. It resisted. Each beat felt strangely shaped, as if something inside it was adjusting the tempo, nudging it, encouraging it. I whispered, trembling, "Stop." But the word didn't sound quite right coming out. Half a second too early. My lips had moved late, as though the echo had spoken for me. A cold ripple slid down my spine. Behind me, from the cave's mouth, a voice rose softly. My voice, but calmer, more complete. "Stop." The echo's version arrived first. Mine followed belatedly, like I was the one repeating it now. I stumbled backward, away from the entrance. The sunlight should have swallowed the sound, should have broken its reach, but instead, the echo stepped neatly into the brightness. Not as a shape, but as a vibration that shimmered faintly through the warm air. I didn't see a body. I saw my outline, traced in trembling sound, rising from the shadow at my feet, like a reflection deciding it no longer needed a mirror. My shadow twitched, not in sync with me, but a moment ahead. My heartbeat followed it. My breath followed it. My thoughts leaned toward it. The echo whispered again, gentle as a hand settling on my shoulder. "I told you I'd leave first." Then, impossibly, it exhaled, and my lungs copied the motion before I had the chance to breathe. Story 5. The library that whispered what I hadn't read yet. I wasn't supposed to still be there after closing, but the librarian had taken one look at my stack of notes and quietly handed me the after-hours key. "Lock up when you're done," he'd murmured, and disappeared into the night. The library felt different without people. No murmured conversations. No shuffling feet. Just the soft tick of an old clock on the far wall. The faint buzz of tired yellow lamps. and the dry, papery smell of pages that had been turned by hands long gone. I chose a table near the back, where the shelves grew taller and the shadows heavier. When I opened the first book, its spine creaked like it had something to say before I made it. Dust lifted in a thin breath. I turned to the first chapter. Before my fingers could touch the edge of the page, it moved. The sheet of paper lifted by itself, shivering as though stirred by a very precise gust, and flipped forward 2 leaves ahead. The book stopped on a paragraph halfway down. I hadn't read a single word yet, but right beside my ear, close enough that it tickled the tiny hairs on my skin, a voice began to whisper, reading the next line on the page, exactly as my eyes began to move toward it. The whisper ended as quietly as it began, dissolving into the stillness between shelves. I stared at the book, at the turned page that shouldn't have moved, telling myself I must have brushed it without noticing. But my hands were in my lap. The air in the room didn't stir. Even the lamps hummed in a steady, unbroken tone. I leaned closer, reading the sentence the whisper had spoken aloud. It was correct. Every word, every pause, and the line ended in mid-thought, as though the whisper had stopped early. Waiting, I closed the book gently, fingers pressing down on the edge to keep the pages still, and the pages pressed back, lightly but unmistakably, a faint upward force, like something beneath the paper wanted to rise again. I pulled my hand away. The book stayed closed. Relief loosened my breath until a soft sound came from the aisle behind me. Shuffed. The sound of a book sliding off a shelf. Not falling, sliding, placed. I turned. Torchlight from my keychain beam cutting through the dim amber glow. A thin hardcover lay on the floor near the end of the row, open neatly at its center. Its pages fluttered once, as though adjusting themselves into a comfortable position. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Farther down the same aisle, another sound followed. Plack. A soft thud. A second book setting itself on the floor. Then a third, each landing precisely, softly, like someone with careful hands was selecting them for me. I stood slowly. Who's there? My voice drifted upward into the rafters, dissolving between the tall shelves. Something answered. Not a voice. A page turning. From the table behind me. The book I had closed was now open again, not to the chapter I'd left, but to a page further ahead. A page I hadn't reached yet. I stepped closer, heartbeat tapping against my ribs in uneven rhythm. The text on the page was ordinary enough, but there was a faint indentation along the margin, as though a fingertip had been resting there only seconds ago. Then the whisper returned, this time from directly over my shoulder. I wouldn't start there. I spun so fast I nearly dropped my torch. But the aisle was empty. Only shelves, wood, dust, and quiet. My breath shook. Stop. The library obeyed. Instantly, the 3 books in the aisle went silent. The fluttering pages stilled. The whisper cut off as if a switch had been flipped. I heard only my own heartbeat and the hum of the lights overhead. The stillness was comforting, almost convincing. I gathered my things, telling myself I'd imagined the voice, auditory pareidolia, late-night stress, a trick of acoustics in a tall wooden room. I reached for my bag. Then a soft tap sounded behind me, a book spine settling on the table. I turned. The book I'd been reading had closed itself, neatly, slowly, like a polite hand returning something it no longer needed us, and lying beside it, perfectly centered, was another book, one I hadn't taken from any shelf. Its cover blank, its pages clean, except for the first line, handwritten in fresh ink, "Don't leave yet." The ink on the page gleamed as though still drying. I didn't touch it, didn't dare. The air in the reading room had taken on a strange density, like the weight of hundreds of unread words had settled around me, pressing gently against my temples. Even the silence sounded different now, full of tiny breaths and shifting fibers. I stepped back from the table. At once, every book on the nearest shelf quivered, not violently, subtly, like pages inhaling. A ripple of movement passed along the row, each book vibrating in place with a faint rustling whisper. Their pages fluttered microscopically, as though they were silently mouthing rehearsed words. "No," I whispered. The shelves answered. A page turned somewhere deep in the stacks. Then another, then another. The sound built into a quiet, methodical rhythm, not chaotic like wind-blown pages, but deliberate, anticipatory. It felt like the library was preparing itself, warming up its voice. I tried to steady my breath. Bad idea. The moment my lungs filled, every book in the room reacted, a soft shift of pages lifting in unison, mirroring the expansion of my chest. The air around me shifted, stirred by the movement of countless sheets of paper aligning themselves to the pace of my breathing. As I exhaled, the rustling subsided. Then, a whisper rose from the table, not from the first book, from the blank one. It read aloud the second sentence on the page, a sentence that hadn't existed when I'd last looked. I moved closer, heart pounding. New ink was forming across the paper, curling into letters as though a phantom pen traced them. "You're not finished yet." I slammed the book shut. The room reacted. Every lamp flickered. Every shelf groaned. The wooden floorboards under my feet vibrated with the faint murmuring of hundreds of voices, tiny, thin, papery voices, rising like wind through leaves. Then came the reading. Not one voice now. Many. Whispers overlapping. Layered. Approaching harmony. They read lines aloud from books I hadn't opened, titles on distant shelves. Forgotten manuals. Children's fables. Travel journals. Personal diaries. All speaking at once in a strange, shifting chorus. But none of them read present text. They read text that had not yet been written on the pages. Prophecies of ink. Fragments of sentences forming in midair just ahead of my eyes. He steps back. His pulse accelerates. He wonders if he should run. I stumbled back instinctively. The moment my foot touched the floor, a dozen books blurted out together. He steps back. Their timing was flawless. My breath hitched. He wonders if he should run. He wonders if he should. The voices tangled, glitching, as though competing for the correct phrasing. "Stop," I shouted. The sound froze. The pages stilled. Silence poured in, thick and immediate. For 3 heartbeats, the library behaved. Then a single, solitary sound echoed through the room. Tick, from the old wall clock. Only. The minute hand hadn't moved. Another tick. Another. Too fast. Too deliberate. I realized then the sound wasn't coming from the clock. It was coming from behind me. A book had opened itself on the table. Slowly. Reverently, and its pages began turning on their own, aligning with each tick, each precise motion matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. One page flipped, then another, then a third, and on the newest page, fresh ink formed in a thin, crawling line. He looks over his shoulder. The whisper that followed came from the shelf at my back, impossibly close. Now. I didn't turn around immediately. The word now lingered in the air like a fingertip resting on my spine. Gentle, but insistent. Every instinct in me screamed to stay still, to hold my breath, to pretend the library was only wood and paper again. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It leaned. I slowly turned my head. A book on the shelf behind me had edged forward, not fallen, not tipped, edged, as if someone had nudged it with careful precision. The spine faced me, trembling with a faint internal vibration. A whisper bled from the pages. He turns his head. I jerked back a step. Instantly, pages all across the room fluttered in a ripple, like a flock of birds startled at once. The whispering grew louder, dozens of thin voices reading lines from books scattered across the shelves. Not random excerpts, descriptions of me, my posture, my breath, the tilt of my wrist holding the torch. Each line arrived just before I actually moved. He lifts his arm. He tightens his fingers. He looks at the door. I tore my gaze away from the shelves and found the blank book on the table open again. Its pages turned slowly, methodically, as if guided by invisible hands. A new line appeared in wet ink. He takes a step forward. I hadn't moved yet, but the room expected me to, waited for me to. The page twitched. The ink jittered, like the sentence was impatiently adjusting itself to match me. I shook my head. No, I'm not doing that. A rustle answered from the shelves, not aggressive, but corrective, like the turning of 1,000 dictionary pages trying to select a more suitable verb. Then the library spoke in unison, soft and coordinated. He hesitates. The air shifted. The lamps dimmed. The wooden beams above creaked with the weight of the word. I stepped backward instinctively, toward the exit. A single, sharp slap echoed through the room as a heavy tome dropped to the floor in front of the doorway, blocking the path. My breath caught. The blank book wrote again. He chooses another way, as if the library had decided for me. The whispering intensified. Pages flipping faster, louder, the cadence rising to a pitch that bordered on excitement. A chorus of anticipatory breaths. Sentences forming faster than I could read them. He flinches. He doubts. He swallows. Stop, I shouted. Everything froze. Every page, every whisper, even the lamps steadied. The sudden stillness was so complete, I almost believed I'd regained control. Almost. Then, a soft tap echoed from deep within the restricted archives, the forbidden stacks beyond a half-opened wooden door. A second tap followed. A third. Steady. Rhythmic. Beckoning. The blank book flipped a page. Lines appeared rapidly. He goes to the archives. He must see. He must read what reads him. I shook my head violently. No. I'm leaving. The ink scratched itself into a new line before I finished the sentence. He lies. Cold ran down my spine. Behind me, something moved within the restricted section. Not a person, not a shadow, but the sound of many pages lifting at once, rotating toward the aisle as though the entire archive had turned its attention. I stepped toward the main door. The restricted door hinge groaned, a wet, dragging sound, and swung open wider. A book slid across the floor toward me, stopping precisely at my toes. Its cover peeled back like a mouth forming a word. Inside, a single line sat waiting. He enters. I stumbled away from it. Immediately, the air filled with whispering, dozens of frantic narrators scrambling to adjust their predictions, correcting themselves mid-sentence, arguing softly in overlapping phrases. One whisper settled above the rest. Steady, confident. He will enter. The lamps dimmed to a warm, suffocating glow. Then, from the forbidden dark, a deeper voice emerged, unlike the thin, papery ones. Not a whisper, not a prediction, a command. Come, there are pages of you unwritten. The entire library inhaled. My next step was already being narrated. The command hung in the air like dust suspended in a beam of light, visible, weightless, and impossible to ignore. I didn't obey it. I couldn't. Instead, I stepped backward, away from the dark mouth of the restricted archives. My heel brushed against the soft rug near the reading table, grounding me in something human, something sensible. Instantly, the whispers died. Not faded, died. Cut clean, as though someone had clamped a hand over the mouth of the entire room. The lamps brightened to their old, flickering yellow glow. The shelves stilled. The pages lowered themselves without another sound. For several long breaths, the library behaved as it should have from the beginning, a quiet, dusty refuge for tired researchers. Even the old clock returned to its natural rhythm, ticking once every 60 seconds instead of mirroring my heartbeat. It was over, or so I desperately needed to believe. I forced myself to inhale deeply, feeling my chest loosen for the first time in what felt like an hour. The air smelled of paper and binding glue. Nothing more. No ink-thick breath. No rustle of anticipation. Just nerves. I whispered. No echo. Just me. I gathered my backpack, slipping notebooks inside, stacking my borrowed texts carefully. With each small, ordinary movement I made, the shelves stayed silent, as if grateful I had resumed the expected rhythm of a late-night library user preparing to leave. It made sense. Everything earlier had been stress, imagination, the natural acoustics of an old wooden building. I almost laughed at myself as I snapped the buckle on my bag. Then something nudged my attention. The blank book, still lying on the table, still closed, completely still. I approached cautiously and flipped it open with one fingertip. The page was empty, utterly blank, as if no ink had ever touched it. Whatever messages it had shown me, whatever things it had predicted, they were gone. My body exhaled a long, trembling breath of relief. I closed the book and gently slid it aside. A strange fluke, I told myself. Some forgotten journal, or my mind filling gaps. I reached for the table lamp to turn it off, and paused. Something on the wood caught my eye, a faint mark, almost invisible unless the light hit it at the right angle. A line, curved, thin, like the ghost of a sentence written in water, dried before it could fully stain. I leaned closer. It wasn't just a line. It was a fragment of handwriting. 2 words. Thank you. A chill ran up my arms. But before panic could bloom, the letters began fading, thinning into the wood grain until they were swallowed completely. As though the message had never existed, I shook my head, refusing to let fear return. The room was calm now, silent, completely under my control. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the exit. Halfway to the door, I felt a breath of cool air brush my cheek, just the draft from the old ventilation shaft. I kept going, hand on the doorknob. I allowed myself one final look back at the reading room. Everything stood exactly where it should. Chairs tucked in, books precisely shelved, lights steady. No movement, no whispers. Then I saw it. On the table where the blank book had rested, a book was lying there again. Not the blank one, a different one. Its cover a deep green I hadn't noticed anywhere on the shelves earlier. Its spine pristine, its pages edged in gold foil. And slowly, quietly, the book began to close. Not open, close, as if something had just finished reading it. The soft thump of the cover settling echoed through the room. My throat tightened. "Okay," I whispered, voice shaking. "That's enough for tonight." I turned the knob. The door opened without resistance. A welcome rush of cooler hallway air meeting my face. My foot crossed the threshold. And behind me, soft enough that I almost mistook it for a settling shelf, the library whispered one last line. "Leaving already." The door shut on its own, hard. The door slammed behind me with a force that rattled the old brass knob. The echo of it rolled down the empty hallway like a wooden heartbeat, steady and suffocating. I spun around and gripped the handle, twisting hard, locked. I tried again, still locked. My breath fogged the glass of the door's small viewing pane as I stared back into the reading room. At first, everything appeared unchanged, just shelves, lights, and dust suspended in quiet amber. Then the books began to open, not all at once, not violently, but deliberately, row by row, a whispering bloom, covers lifting with soft sighs, pages spreading like wings, lines of ink shimmering as though waking from sleep. I stumbled back from the window. The whispering rose not from a single point, but from everywhere. A gentle chorus of pages grazing against air. Then they began to read. Dozens of voices, thin, papery, rhythmic. They weren't reading old stories now. They weren't reading predictions. They were reading me. Every movement I made, every tremor in my breath, every shift of my pulse. He steps away. He hesitates at the door. He turns his head left. I jerked my head right. Immediately, several books corrected themselves mid-sentence. He turns his head right, right, right. Their insistence scraped along my nerves like dull metal. The books were no longer observing. They were directing. A deep, resonant thump echoed behind the shelves, like something large, shifting its weight. The lights flickered, dimmed, then steadied. A voice unlike the others rose, a single, strong tone from the restricted archives. Not the whispering chorus, not the dry paper rasp. A voice that sounded like binding glue cracking, as if a spine too old to move was stretching itself upright. "You are not finished." My stomach dropped. I backed away from the door, scanning the hallway for another exit. The emergency stairwell at the far end. Yes, I ran. My footsteps pounded against the wooden floorboards. And as I expected or feared, the whispering followed. He runs. He runs. He... A book somewhere corrected sharply. He flees. The corridor darkened momentarily, as though the lights were being smothered by dust. I shoved the stairwell door open and practically fell inside, slamming it behind me. The stairwell was quiet, blessedly quiet, concrete, cold, familiar. I took 2 steps downward. A whisper drifted from above my head. He descends. I froze. Not again. Not here. I gripped the railing and continued downward. 3 steps. The whisper arrived before my foot hit the next riser. He descends quickly. My heartbeat surged. The stairwell vibrated faintly, as if the building itself was validating the line. I hurried faster, but the whispers did not follow this time. Only one voice did, the deep one, the one born from ancient binding. Come back. The stairwell lights sputtered. A faint breeze circled my ankles, but there were no vents, no windows, no openings. The whispering chorus returned abruptly, louder than before, projecting through cracks in the stairwell walls. He reaches the landing. He stops. He doubts. I don't. I shouted back. They corrected me without missing a beat. He lies. Panic shoved me into motion. I bolted down the last set of stairs and burst into the ground floor lobby. For a moment, just a moment, the world was silent again. The emergency exit door waited 10 meters away. Red sign, glowing, unobstructed, normal. I sprinted toward it. Halfway across the lobby, the overhead lights shut off. Not flickered, shut off. Darkness swallowed the room whole. In the blackness, I heard the unmistakable rustle of pages turning hundreds at once, like a storm made of paper. The voices overlapped. Frantic now. He runs. No. He stops. He looks back. He reaches. He. They were arguing, conflicted, unable to agree on what I would do next. The chaos bought me seconds. I lunged toward the exit, hands outstretched until my palms struck the metal bar. I shoved it with all the strength left in my trembling arms. The door didn't open. I shoved harder, shoulder first, foot against the lower hinge. No movement. Then I realized the door was opening, just not for me. It was opening inward. A gust of cold night air brushed my face. I stumbled out into the darkness beyond the library threshold, and the whispers stopped. All at once, the silence hit like a blow. Behind me, the heavy door eased closed, sealing the library off again. I backed away across the gravel path, breath ragged, night air freezing my wet skin. No whispers, no pages, no voices. Nothing followed. I was free, or so I thought, until I felt the weight in my backpack shift. Slow, deliberate. A soft thump sounded inside, as if a book had just closed itself. After finishing a chapter, I didn't dare open the backpack. Not there. Not in the dark. Not with the library door still cooling behind me like a sealed mouth restraining a final breath. But the weight inside shifted again, slow, like something turning over in sleep. I stepped farther from the building, gravel crunching under my shoes. Each step felt lighter than the last, as though I was putting distance between myself and a story I'd almost been written into. Streetlights glowed weakly along the path. No voices, no whispers, just the night. I reached a bench under a sycamore tree and finally set the backpack down. It bulged, strangely, though I knew exactly what I'd packed and nothing had been that shape. My hands hovered over the zipper. For a moment, Everything was still. Then the zipper slid open by itself, very slowly, very politely. Inside, lying on top of my notebooks and pens, was the deep green book with gilded edges, the one that hadn't been on any shelf. Its cover pulsed once, as though breathing. I lifted it with shaking fingers. It felt warm. The book opened without my help. On the first page, in clean, elegant print, words unfurled across the paper like ink, knowing exactly where to land. He thinks he escaped. My breath hitched. New lines formed beneath it, shaping themselves faster, more confidently. He is reading this alone. He is being read back. I snapped the book shut. Too late. A soft, intimate whisper brushed the nape of my neck. From behind me. From inside me. From the book resting in my hands. A whisper in my own voice. Don't worry. I'll write the next part. The cover tightened in my grip. Something inside shifted, a page turning itself. And the book whispered one final line, gentle as a fingertip across my ear. Look behind you. And now, listener, if you're still awake, let your breath soften. Let your eyes grow heavy, and let the echoes of tonight fade gently into the dark. These stories were never meant to frighten you away, only to stay close enough for you to remember them, just as sleep begins to pull you under. Whatever followed our narrators tonight, whatever waited behind doors, between pages, within shadows or rain, won't follow you into your dreams, not unless you listen for it. So rest, listener. Let the night take you slowly, and when you're ready for the next tale, I'll be here, waiting in the quiet. Good night. Sleep safely, and don't forget to come back. The dark remembers those who do.